Hey folks, Green Stuff Gav here. This week we've got something a little bit different, and we're going to cover some basing technique that I used. Now, I've been working on an Adeptus Custodi army, done in a nice white and gold scheme rather than just spray them gold and work them up from there. And as part of this, inspired by my friend Alhouse, I wanted to use a cracked earth lava effect on the base. But rather than just do cracked earth over a nice lava effect, what I've done also is to cut some holes in the bases and apply some skulls, almost as if it's chaos itself tearing through the floor. Now you can't quite see on this guy because the guy himself is in the way, but here's a couple that I did earlier. So I don't know if you can see worked up the yellows to the reds and then covered it all in Molten Earth from Games Workshop for this lovely cracked effect. I think this will just help, especially in armies like the Custodes, where it is a lot of blank. There's a lot of blank colours, like there's a lot of gold on there, there's a lot of white on there, so just a little bit of something helps add some contrast to the miniatures themselves. So we'll be going through the complete process here, but to start we'll cover how I actually convert it to bases. So one box of the Custodes to start with. As we can see, I won't do an unboxing because we all know what these guys are. Instructions. Most importantly, one pack of bases. We want one of these bases. I do these individually, one by one, to make sure they're all different and none of them look the same, because repetition, while works on many bases, for this army specifically I think would be detrimental just to have them all identical. So the Games Workshop 40mm bases, you can see you've got all these pegs in. A lot of the older white metal models would have pegs on their feet that you'd drill the hole and poke into. Now for us, obviously we're not that interested, but it does affect how we're going to cut. So you could sit and you could plan out how you want the holes for your skulls to be, but I tend to find just cutting triangles as just randomly will give you some big gaps and some little gaps. Obviously you could cut away the studs themselves, but they're actually going to add some supports later. So you can see I've just scored there, and that's going to be the hole that we're going to cut into the base. So now that we've scored it, we've got our shape. We carefully push through and drag slowly to create our gaps. So easy does it. As with most things, you want a nice sharp knife and you want to take your time. Last thing you want to do is to slip or to overcut, ruin the base, or even worse, injure yourself. Now, if we turn it over, we can see the marks have come mostly through. Ironically, this is because this surface is flat to the base, so the knife hasn't been able to come all the way through. But that's viewable enough that just by pushing them gently, pop off. Just going to remove all this excess. See this one? This looks a little bit flat to me, but we've got this stud. So I am going to take my clippers. Now the studs are in different places on different era of bases. The newer ones don't, I think only have 4 and they're quite close together. So now we've taken that a bit, we're just going to follow through with and cut a nice thing. Obviously, if you've got specific characters whose legs don't move about, make sure you're cutting so that you've still got room for the miniature to stand on, because otherwise this is pointless. Now this one here, that's going to be too small for anything to go on, so we're just going to widen that, because ultimately I'm going to stuff these full of skulls, because what's more 40k than skulls? Just carefully trim the edges. Don't have to be neat, certainly don't want it to be geometrical. You want them all to be individual and different, because that adds to the whole chaos. And people generally spot things quite uniform because pattern recognition. So you see we've got a nice hole there. So we're going to follow up with a bit of plastic art. Now I keep all my offcuts. I've got a variety, I've got a literal bag full of different offcuts of different types, deck plating, brickwork, plain plastic, as well as I've got actual sheets of new, but that isn't really warranted for this project. You can see that sits on there nice, covers up the hole. This is important because we're going to be gluing skulls into this bit. So all I'm going to do is put a tab of glue around these studs. This is the Colour Forge super glue received in the unboxing last week. It's a little bit thin for my liking. It's very watery. You can see it just, I don't know if you can see it, it's just pouring out there. And we're going to just add this to make sure the hole is filled. So while we leave that to set, we're going to find our pot of skulls. Now Games Workshop do a actual box of skulls, which I've had a rummage through and found many that are the right sort of size for this project. Is obviously you've got various different skulls, different sizes. Things like the demon skulls and the Beasts of Chaos skulls are going to be too big for these bases, but you might have seen them on the jet bike bases I just showed you. Certainly things like characters as well that fit. So again, here's a flood layer, which while fitting for Grey Knights isn't really suitable here. We're just looking for plain skulls. So we've got things like an orc skull, that'd be quite a good one. Let's have some light in the situation. We've got normal skulls, they're useful. We've got these really cool little bird skulls in the skull set, which I don't know if you guys can see that, but at least against the pink of my hand. So that can be useful for poking into gaps. Recruit skulls are quite good if you've got a big enough gap. For example, they'd fit out quite nicely, but we're not going to use them. So while it's had a couple of seconds to dry, we're going to first of all take our clippers and trim this bit. Go back in the pot, and then we're going to take our knife and carefully just trim the edge. Now what you can do, in fact what I think I'm going to do in this instance, is I'm actually going to trim these down slightly because that was sitting far too proud for my liking. carefully not take them off completely, because you need to have some depth to put your skulls into. But we're just going to trim them slightly. We'll tidy it up with a bit of sandpaper in a moment. So now we've trimmed them slightly, I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper, fold this down, and we're just going to smooth these bits off. As you can see, just a touch, just so the same depth as the piece of plastic card you're using, whether you're using thick or thinner. You just want to take the edge off so that when it's glued on, it's going to sit inside the base and not sit proud. So, entertaining viewing, I know, but I'm not trimming this down to show you, oh, it's easy, I did it in moments. This is a real time how long it takes to do a base. So I don't know if you can see there, but this has now been slightly, so that if I take some more of this off, this should now sit inside the base. If it doesn't, trim down the studs a bit more. So it just wants to come in a little bit more. You can see that side sits inside, that side doesn't. So just want to trim this bit down a touch. Thankfully the holes we've cut don't come all the way to the edge of the base, so there you go. That's still sitting touch proud. I don't know if you can see that, by about 1 millimetre. So I just want to take this one down a touch more, and that will give us, it won't add to the height of the base is the key thing. If you really were unconcerned about the height of the bases, you could just glue them onto the bases themselves onto plastic card all the way round, but you generally get an extra couple of mil on the base height, and they'll be noticeable when stood alongside other bases. So there we go. Still sitting slightly proud on this one. So you just see that. So just want to take this one down a touch. Again, I'm just putting sandpaper on and rubbing it. Any grit will do. This is all off-cut sandpaper from old projects. And again, keep all the bits and pieces, but keep them all in a bag so they don't get lost or mixed up or thrown out or just make the place untidy. So there we are. That sits nice and flush inside the base. So we're going to reapply some glue. This time, because we're not going here, we're just going to see how watery that is. So, keep some pressure on it for a moment. While it glues, let's clean this rubbish up into the bin. It takes a moment for this this colour forge glue. It's quite liquid. It could be they do different depths, different viscosities, but that's the one that we received in the mystery box. So, okay, here we are. Now we're going to do the fun part and glue some models, glue some skulls in. So just sort of Now some of the skulls you can see have got, oh you might not be able to see, have got a little bit of flash on them, so we're just going to give it a quick sand. It won't make a lot of difference by the time it's undercoated, but so now for gluing the skulls in, some we glue down, as try and do this so you can see, some we glue down like this. We just sort of mix up the angling of them. You want some that are facing upwards, some are downwards, as if they were all, again, if they're all uniform, then that detracts from the effect, because man is very good at spotting patterns. So you want to just mix it up a bit. Sometimes just drop them in, maneuver them about until they look good. So this one's got a nice little hole in, so he's going to sit in there. Again, you can see this gap here will be good for this one. So we're gonna, some people use tweezers, bits of blue tack on a stick, but I'm of the opinion that you should have fun with it, and sometimes you just got to get glue everywhere. If you made a mess, you must have had fun. So here's a nice gene stealer skull. Again, these are really long, thin skulls, so they suit into slots like this quite well. Just going to take this glue off. Got a tiny little skull. I'm just going to glue here. Again, a bit of an angle. If anything doesn't fit properly, you can always go in with your knife and just trim it up a touch, but that's going to sit in there nicely. So, and the trick is not to completely fill the hole, because we're looking at having some glowing effect coming through. There we have. So that's going to look good with the guy stood, because he'll stand either side here. It's not covered. You could cover the entire base if you wished. You could spend some time with a knife and a bit of plastic art on the bottom to create just an empty depth, which you can fill with whatever you wish. But I don't think that's worth for this army project, because that would then be detracting from the miniature itself. So we're going to take our skulls and put these back in the pot. Again, I'd normally model half a dozen or however many for a squad all at once, but that would be an exceptionally long video. So we're going to go undercoat this and we'll be back for some painting. Okay, so we're back. We've given everything a nice black spray, as you can see. It's a little bit of white showing through in the very recesses, but you won't see that by the time there's a miniature and it's on the field. So we're going on to do some of the actual flame effects now. Now there's various different methods of doing it. There's easy ways, and there's the way that this is the way I tend to do it. So a lot of people will tell you, oh, you can't do yellow flame effects over black. However, you can, it just takes a bit of work and knowledge of colours. So we're starting with Deathclaw Brown from Games Workshop. I used to like the Scrag Brown they used to do, but they don't do it anymore. So this is close to, but not quite the same. A lot of my colours start from this. So we're going to do this slightly thicker than we would do if we're painting miniatures, but that only adds to the texture. And all we're going to do is from the edges, we're going to just build this out. So this is going to be the basis of our yellow. So effectively we're going to go from yellow out to red, and then we're going to cover the whole thing in Molten Earth. So we don't have to be neat, we don't have to be tidy, we just have to slap a load on there, because once this dries we're going to go on and build it up to yellow. So we don't really care too much if we do hit the skulls, because when all's said and done, after we're finished, they're going to be painted in a bone colour. But it's more about getting the look of the thing here. So like I say, you could theoretically go in and do all the bases of it and then glue the skulls in. However, I really like the contrast, so by putting on this when we put the colour on, so if you see this corner here, you can't really tell there's the corner, but by the time we get some colour on there, it really brings some the contrast brings some real definition out. So we're just going to stick this on, easy as that. Again, this is a good basis for our yellow to go on. So, clean the brush, a bit of water. There are some, I was given some Painter's Bakery stuff, but I quite like the old school techniques really. So now there are various ways of building up, whether you do another coat, build it up, add yellow, build another coat. However, whatever the new version is, the Uriel yellow is a really solid colour, in the fact that it's yellow, but it's also got that slight brown to it. Gives Rituals fantastic pots. So I'm going to take a load of that and stick that straight onto the brown we've been using. Thankfully Uriel yellow is quite a thin, but I tend to add a slight drop of Painter's Bakery Painter's Milk straight into my pots as soon as I open them, and then that's why you see me shaking them so much, because it just gives them a bit of a flow aid effectively. So we're just going to go back over all of the brown. See how that's gone straight over the brown now? I mean, if we go on to the black with it, it doesn't, you can see, I don't know if you probably can't see actually, but here there's where it's not gone the brown, it's got that slightly greenish tinge to it that you get when you put yellow over black, which won't look too good, but regardless, so that's why we do Death Claw brown straight over black. And again, we're not being too neat here, we're not being too tidy, we don't really care that much, because we're still going to be going over this with red and then going over it with Molten Earth. So just going around, same issue, starting from the cut, because that also gives us a bit of fade. Easy as that. Nice yellow effect. Now I'm going to stick some yellow on the palette, because we're going straight up to Mephiston red. No, we're not. So I have to remember this. We're going to Wild Rider red, which is, although it's labelled as a red, it's more of an orange. Now you could go in and spend some time wet blending these, however with the amount that will be visible on the end base, we're not really going to be much warrant for it. Now with these, we're not quite going to the edges, because this means that when we get this, when we put the cracked earth on, we'll have a nice yellow, which moves to orange, which moves to red as the cracking medium works. Now this orange can go straight over black, but obviously it doesn't come out quite as well, so we're trying to just keep on top of the yellow, and then using the edge of the brush gives us this nice little brush stroke effect. So we can see here where it's not quite clean, it's not straight edging. Some have got deeper strokes, some have lighter strokes, and this whole aids to the whole effect that this is something wild, this is fire, this isn't uniform. So again, we're going almost to the edge, but not quite. If you do mess up and go to the edge, then it really won't make a lot of difference, because as I said, we're going to be sticking red over the top of this, and then we're going to be sticking Molten Earth on top as well. So thankfully it's quite hot here in the UK, so paints are drying pretty quick. And then we're going to go to Mephiston Red. This is the problem I've got with GW pots. So every now and then I'll peel the lids off and actually get a screwdriver in and dig all that crap out. I'm not going to go too hard with this, because again this will all be hidden. So we're just going to stick some red. Very patchy, sometimes you can see the orange through, sometimes you can't, but it won't be massively noticeable by the time we come to finish the base. And again, you could go all the way out, cover the whole base with this effect without any issue, which is what Alhaus did, or you could do paths of lava, whatever suits the army and suits the style that you're going for. So for me, like I say, this is just to give a bit of interest to the base, but not really detract from the miniatures themselves. So you can see we've come all the way around. Now where the red has gone slightly on the black is it fades a little bit, but that worked quite well. So we're going to leave that for a moment to dry. Clean our brush. And while that dries, we've got Games Workshop's Molten Earth. So I'm going to start giving this a shake while that red dries, because you don't want to do this while it's wet. See, it's drying quite quickly. Again, I'm just literally shaking this pot up. The technical, any of the cracked earth mediums, whether it's Molten Earth or I think it's, you've got Sterling Battlemire, Agrellan Earth, no, not Battlemire, I think Agrellan Earth is another one that I've used. You want to give them a good shake because all the sediment gets at the bottom. There are machines to do it, but quite frankly, I don't use them enough to warrant it. So how dry is that? That's quite dry. So we're going to crack this open. Now this we're not going to dilute. We're not going to do anything here. We're literally going to get a huge blob of it on the brush and just whack it on the base. We're going to go almost to the edge. Some cases we do, some cases we don't. We're going to stick an absolute load of it on. Just pat it round. Obviously the thicker it goes on, the bigger your cracks you get. Now sometimes it's better to give the base a varnish before doing this, but I tend to find because we're using water-based paints, they tend to go on there fine. You see we've covered all of that. Nice thick coating. So put this away. Try that brush. You probably see I've used a different brush, a nice thick knackered brush, which was a base brush, but because again it's not a brush that we really care about. So now the difficult part. Now that we've done this, we've basically got to leave this to completely dry. So they say, oh, give it a few hours, but I tend to leave it overnight. But I'll give it a few hours and we'll have a look, but otherwise we'll be back tomorrow and we'll finish up, because by that point this will all crack, we can paint the skulls, and then this base is done effectively. So right, I'm gonna let that dry and see you in a bit. Okay, so here we are. The base has had plenty of time to dry. Now we can see it's not quite come to the edges. I didn't quite go further enough on, but with all the breakage, all the molten earth splitting and cracking, you can see how, although we didn't blend the colours properly, they still give the effect where all the it's visible amongst the cracked earth. Now this normally I wouldn't be too keen on, but when you're doing an army's worth and you'll have a figure stood on top of it, you're not really going to see a lot of it. So to finish up, all we've got to do is paint the skulls themselves. So I really like Rakarth Flesh by Games Workshop, because that goes as a base colour, it goes straight over black, and we'll be following it up afterwards with Wraithbone. But so first of all, this has come out. It's quite hot here in the UK, so that's quite thick. And plenty of water, and then it's simply. This is why we didn't care too much about where we stuck the yellow. Now this is effectively wet brushing, so very similar to a dry brush with a bit more paint on it, and that then gives us all the black detailing, so things like the eye sockets and the nose sockets. And we're being careful not to come over any of the yellow that we've done, because it's easier than having to go back and fix everything. So you can see it's just picking out, and again we don't have to make sure we paint the entirety of the skull, because some of it's actually inside the base, so it's only really what's visible. And again, this is where when the miniature's on there, no one's really going to notice too much. So just picking out the last skull there. And this is why we put them at different angles, different facings, just to give a bit more texture to save uniformity. And easy as that. So I don't know if you guys can see that. But yeah. Then we're going to let that dry. Thankfully again in the UK it's quite hot. Normally if you're doing half a dozen at once, it means that you can go on, paint the Rakarth Flesh on the next one, then on the next one, then on the next one, and then by the time you come back this will be dry. So again, while Wraithbone is a base colour and can go straight over black, state of that, can go straight over black, we're going to be just using this as an edge highlight, and this paint has died. So thankfully painter's milk. I'm going to put a few drops of that in there. Now this is where some people say putting ball bearings in helps, because you don't have to use such effort, or you can get away with using one of the fancy machines. But I'm old school, so I'm used to doing it by hand. So give that a quick shake. I'll go back and give this a proper going over in a bit, but that's given us enough. No, not quite enough to work with. You can see some of it's coming off there, but just wants a touch more. Again, this is why the dropper bottle paints are much better than these lids that Games Workshop use these days, because these don't work very well at all. Terrible for drying up. You probably saw yesterday I'm still using paints from the 90s without issue, but obviously Wraithbone being quite a new paint, it shouldn't be this dry. So give it good going over. Second hand. We'll see how that helps. There you go, there's plenty of water there. Probably a bit too watery, but we can go in and fix it in a moment. So got a nice plane, and again we're just going to do the edges. We're not going to do the whole bone, just to give a bit of interest. Again, these are going to be stood on by a guide, so people's eyes are going to be drawn to the miniature themselves. This is just giving a bit more interest to the army and help your basins may need to help your army stand out. So you want people's attention to be on your miniatures. There's a lot of discussion about doing these big intricate bases with all these water effects and things like that, and where suitable, fine. However, you still need to remember the fact that the base is only part of the model. Your base should enhance your model, not detract from all the extra effort you've done. So that is, I'm going to put this aside so that I can remember to fix that later. So on the whole, that's from start to finish how I do the basin for the Custode army. So again, it's quick, it's quite straightforward. Again, we've not quite gone to the edges, so it's not quite as nice as I'd have liked, but when you've got 20 or so of these, then really no one's going to be massively concerned. So thanks for watching, and as always, have fun.